Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 14, Lydian Tonality.
All right, Eric, so what tonality is this? So part of the claim I want to make here is not necessarily. That's the problem. Everyone thinks that that's major. For some reason, the 5 chord is just getting tossed aside in Lydian, and I understand why, because you have to be really careful with it in Lydian. You can't make a 7th chord out of the 5 chord. I mean, you probably could, but I think for most people, it's going to jar them out of fa being the resting tone. But this is a wider conversation about Lydian and problems with audiating Lydian that we've had, private discussions about.
Yeah, so it could be Lydian, and you left, because you left out everything. But from my listening vocabulary, because it's however many more percent major than Lydian, that I superimposed, it's subjective is what you're asking, is that it could be do, fa, or so, do, fa. Don't know which one it is.
Or if we take something that was more of a harmonic thing, but like something like this. There is not enough information there to make it an objective statement about whether that's major or Lydian. There's no, the 4 has been omitted as a tone. So,
yeah.
And I have to say it like that because we don't know what tonality we're in yet. Either if it was major, fa is missing. If it was Lydian, T was missing.
We wouldn't agree. We don't have to agree on it. I totally call it major because it's easier.
Sure.
But it's not the only possibility, and you could make the point, and I would have to agree.
So, we've had conversations about Lydian's. It's a fussy tonality in the sense that it doesn't have a ton of functions that are available to it while you're, harmonically exploring the tonality. The 1 and the 2 chord for me are the biggest contenders of what's going to be essential.
And I do the 5 and the 6.
Yeah, the 6. Yeah, for sure. That's pretty much what I have in my repertoire.
Yeah, I don't use the 3 yet, or I haven't found a reason for it as much. Mm-hmm. But I've got, my Lydian songs are... So, where are we starting with Lydian, anyway? So, it's less stable, I think is what you mean when it's, right? I call these tonalities less stable than major is the most stable, minor next. Dorian Mixolydian, pretty damn stable. And then you get into Phrygian's pretty stable. But Lydian seems to, at least one person I know of doesn't even believe that Lydian is a tonality, and he's a well-known music educator. We brought him up before. And I just disagree. Although I can go to bat for him and say, if you sing tonal patterns in Lydian, when you're singing the major 2, it can sound like in tonal patterns, it can sound like a double dominant. There's no difference.
Can I play that?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if we do a little patterns in major, like I'm just gonna establish major for a sec. So if I go. So I established major, so it's going to be really easy to hear that. But even if I just go... that still sounded like major with the 5 of 5.
Yep.
I was playing in the key of E, but...
Oh, you're in the key E?
Yeah, I'm in the key of E. It's a lovely key for the guitar.
when you play a melody and you avoid the four or the flat four, and you only play Fi if you're thinking theoretically. If you're only playing T and the resting tone is Fa. Now I changed keys because that's what I'm used to.
It's okay. I can't even hear you piano.
I just went to F. Anyway, I'm at F now. It's like. And I can't help but not think that's Lydian. And then. And that can sound major. And the question is, have you solidified Fa as the resting tone in your audiation while you're playing these things? When you're harmonically playing Lydian, like you're using the chords, the essential chords in Lydian, the 1, the 2. 5's not essential, but it's good. It's a good chord. And then I sometimes have the 6 in my songs too. But it's not a wrong chord, the 5 chord. It doesn't make it major because you have the 5 chord in it, or more major or less major, or more Lydian or less. To have that 5 chord in there. I don't believe. The question is, you must avoid, the B flat if you're in F. If you're in F Lydian. You can't.
Oh, for sure.
You can't borrow anything like that unless you're really intentionally going to go away from Lydian. But to me, it's Lydian. With chordal sequence, just bum, 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 and it's there, and it can't not be Lydian.
So earlier, when you mentioned this issue with Lydian being stable, what we're really talking about is that when you play functions or tonal patterns that are representing functions in specific orders, there are functions that we hear in Lydian that are also in major, so they're the same tones, but they're in different contexts, and they're so subtle that it's really easy for people to flip from Lydian into major because that major context is so predominant in our culture. But the same thing happens with this is another point I wanted to make about Lydian, is there are a lot of songs that people think are in Lydian that are actually in Aeolian, just being played with the 6 chord a lot.
Yeah, that's possible.
I think I always struggle to come up with the name of this song. It's Fleetwood Mac. There's a song in Fleetwood Mac. It's just F to G all day.
Yeah.
But if you listen to the way the melody is phrased, La, or the A note, is the resting tone.
Yes.
And so people always use this song as an example of Lydian. And our colleague who rejects Lydian, if he's rejecting it on these sorts of grounds, I'm very sympathetic with him, because for a long time, I even hear like guitar players who are playing it tonalities and they're like Lydian soloing, and no, it's actually Aeolian with the 6 chord being played a lot. So if you're in the key of Aeolian, we're really talking about just hammering on an F chord, and this is where you get into some issues with establishing context. Just because you play F and G a lot doesn't mean the context is Aeolian or F Lydian. Sorry. You could play F and G all day and still be hearing...
or G Mixolydian.
Yeah, exactly.
Or the 4 and 5 chord in C major, and you just never get there because you're withholding it. So that makes that a little bit subjective. What I can agree with is when you do tonal patterns in Lydian, it's much, much harder to objectively establish the 2 chord as not a double dominant.
Yeah, for sure.
It just isn't as that you can start adding re, fi, re instead of so, ti, so, fa, fa, do, fa.
Yep. Yeah, I can see that.
If you do that, then you're major. Even if you avoid the 4 chord, it depends on what you're audiating, though. It's like the resting tone and the function. So it's both. If you don't have the resting tone, you don't have the tonality. If you don't have the function, you don't know how the tones that you're playing match to a context inside of a context. You got to have the harmonic context inside of the tonality, because otherwise you're less subjective about what you're playing.
And the example,
and for kids and getting these tonalities taught well means that you should be as objective as possible, and then throw them examples that are not necessarily objective, and see where you can infer and go on from there about what is your student hearing when they hear this, because they could be audioing two at the same time, or one and not the other. And it's often a function of how much listening vocabulary you have in Lydian, because when it's new to you, it almost always sounds major. Yeah,
for sure. And this example I gave, the couple examples I gave at the start of the podcast of this little thing. That's a perfectly valid Lydian groove. It's a 1-5. And you almost never see that in a Lydian song because people are paranoid about the 5 chord not being used. But in my mind, if you play, something like this, a lot of people, if they're audiating Lydian, using tonal patterns on the 5 sound totally natural, because it's implying the same location of the resting tone as major is. That's Lydian and major. They're the same. It's just like how there's so many licks, whether if you're in Dorian or Aeolian, are the same, because they they share the same function, so they sound the same.
The 5 chord would never have a 7th in it, though.
But the point that I want to make here is, well, there's that, but there's also, if you're playing in, like, air quote Lydian, and the 5 chord doesn't sound right to you in terms of it's, like, if I go, right now I'm hoping that this sounds like the resting tone. That's because you're hearing as the resting tone. I just don't know if you're hearing do or fa right now, but if I go, for me, that really still sounds like the resting tone. But for some people, the resting tone sounds like it's in a different location, and that's a sign to me that you're not actually audiating Lydian, you're audiating Aeolian, just thinking that the 4 chord is theoretically, thinking fa is theoretically the resting tone, but you're really hearing la as the resting tone. And this is quite common, actually, of what I was saying before. So, and that's one way you can tell if you're actually audiating Lydian. You have to know how to litmus test yourself and see, is this truly the the resting tone? Because often if you play other people's songs that are air quote Lydian, I don't think this is as much a situation in MLT circles. I think people in MLT land have this more sorted out, but in the wild, if you search for like Lydian songs on YouTube and stuff like that, they're often not actually Lydian.
No, there's so many that are misnamed out there. For me, by my ear, they're just not. Yeah. So I mean, to say that Lydian isn't a tonality, which has been bandied about by a couple of people, just doesn't make sense, because it's just completely Lydian. So that second one's my tune. The first one is a Doug Nichols tune, and they're just Lydian. That's the end of the story. I've got more. Fa, la do ti so fa. Yep. It just so. And then to make them objective, and all of those have the 5 chord in them. I never avoided them. There are a couple tunes that I use that are only the 1 and 2 chord in Lydian, but they're just not as strong to me. But they're clearly still Lydian. I like the 5 chord in Lydian because it really gives fa the weight that it needs.
It really does, because if you just keep playing. mean, some people might not hear. They might not hear that as the resting tone, but the 5 chord. It gives it a weight to the. It has a leading tone in it. I mean, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know what to say about it other than just make sure your Lydian tone or Lydian songs are Lydian. Mm-hmm. Make them pretty objective. You know, and avoid the flat 4 is what you need to do. It doesn't take secondary dominance very well.
It's funny. A lot of these tonalities don't handle secondary dominance. It seems like minor and major are the only ones that really handle them well. Like if you start throwing secondary dominance into Lydian and Dorian and Phrygian, it starts.
It goes major minor right away.
Yeah. Which is probably why, major and minor have been hammered on. Even major, like if you look at the bebop, like jazz standards, almost all of them are major tunes. There's only a small section of them that are in minor. And I think the reason for this is that major tunes can handle much more of a harmonic beating than the other tonalities can.
Yeah, for sure.
And bebop players loved, using secondary dominance and tritone subs and stuff like that. And major handles this by far the best.
Yeah. What about so the Kind of Blue album? What is it? What's the name of that tune?
I can't remember.
So what?
Oh, the.
So what? There's your. Yeah. I can't audio as well as you can. I messed up a little, but it's like that's clearly Dorian, right? Isn't it? It's just can't avoid it.
Yeah.
You can't avoid that, and it's. We need maybe we need some Lydian tunes and
you could do a Lydian version of this. Like I'm trying to think.
Dude.
This is another cool thing about Lydian. If you think of major and minor and the relationship, like, major with its relative minor, Lydian and Dorian are relative like majors and minors with each other. They're the same distance away from each other. And it's a really cool way to look at them. I mean, that's how I was thinking of what I just played there.
Oh, okay. Because I played it in parallel.
I know. Usually, I'm riding the parallel hobby horse. Yeah. But no, it's fun. So if you think of D Dorian, which is like usually the easiest Dorian keyality to think of, D. F Lydian it's like it's major, right? So it's like Dorian is the minor version, and it's a funny way to think about it. It's kind of cool, and having songs that explore that is cool.
Yeah.
Because they basically you can get F Lydian off the ground with just F and G, and you can get D Dorian off the ground with F and G with a D in the bass. So let me play what I'm talking about here. So if you or let me do this another way. So if I establish Lydian here. Here's the root melody. Da, da, da. Now, you can use those same chords to establish Dorian. How do we do this here? You need another tone in the bass to keep Re solidified as the resting tone. But it's cool. They use the same... And you can actually do this with the other tonalities. I talked about this in another podcast, but like So if you're staying within movable Do in the keyalities that we're talking about here, F Lydian, D Dorian, A Aeolian, B Locrian, you can use F and G over everything. So F and G is the cash money in major. It's the cash money in Aeolian. It works over Phrygian. It's really cool, actually. I learned that from Frank Gambale. That's how he teaches making modal chord progressions or tonal chord progressions. But that's a cool thing that not a lot of people I think have heard about.
Yeah, besides all the tunes that I play that are Lydian tunes the kids learn as babies, toddlers, 3, 4-year-olds, and they don't know anything about the resting tone. But they're obviously bathed in all this listening vocabulary and performing vocabulary if they're ready to sing. When it comes to teaching Lydian, the best thing I do is I play Twinkle Twinkle in major and then play Twinkle Twinkle in Lydian. And we sing the resting tones and we sing, and it just makes so much sense to the kids. Because it just stands out like no other tonality.
You doing this in parallel?
Yeah.
Yeah. I can't hear your piano, but I'm just,
Yeah.
No, totally. It does stand out.
The minor, the Phrygian, all the other ways to play Twinkle Twinkle, that's the best way to get at Lydian, in an unfamiliar, to take a familiar song and do it in an unfamiliar way. And it just sticks out. The kids can get Phrygian easily, even though it's later in my tonality sequence.
Yeah, and then that goes back to an earlier episode we have about the street version of partial synthesis. It really is just taking things that people can audiate and then making a change to them and showing them explicitly how to identify the change. Like some students I have, if I do the Lydian Twinkle, which I've done lots before, some students just immediately know. They're like, that's not right. And it's most of them because it stands out so much and the song's so familiar. But usually, if they don't get it, you can coach them into it pretty fast. I think that's very cool.
Yeah, I just play essential functions. I play familiar songs in an unfamiliar tonality, and we'll sing the roots, and that's of Lydian songs, and it falls into place just as simply as just about any other tonality. Mm-hmm. Although it is just a slightly less stable because it's easy to fall out of it.
Another thing that we didn't talk about with Lydian is, how we talked about major has this ability to take secondary dominance, like 5 of 5, 5 of 2, 5 of 3, all this stuff. Lydian has this very interesting ability to, it stylistically works very well to rapidly change keyality, but keep the tonality the same. So if you... It handles modulations very well in terms of...
from fa to fa, fa to a new fa.
Fa to a new fa. And it can go all the way. I remember when I was in high school, I was showing my band teacher this little tune I composed, and it just kept... It was Lydian modulations that just kept going up minor thirds. Can you imagine if you're a band teacher and one of your students is like, "Hey, look at these." Probably so fun. But no, it really does handle it well. And what's weird is it handles it better than Dorian does. You would think because Lydian and Dorian have this majory minory relationship, Dorian would also do this. It doesn't handle it as well as Lydian does. So this is a cool thing you can get from... It handles it
So what are you doing there?
So this is just... There's the resting tone. Or sorry. So there's fa. There's do. And there's ti. And then I'm just going up a minor third. But this fa, do, ti. The reason I put ti in here is because it just makes it sound like Lydian. You're not getting that anywhere else. You can kind of get it from Locrian, but it's not really the same thing. And then I just keep boosting ti up to do.
Yeah, it's not a tonality.
Nah, Locrian's good. Locrian's very cool. I think Locrian's similar. It's just people don't know how to handle Locrian properly. It gets a bad rap.
I don't give it a bad rap. I just can't use it. It just never
Once
settle.
again, if you want to hear someone improvise over Locrian, look up Frank Gambale and search Locrian, and you will immediately be like, "Oh yeah, Locrian." I'm just not hearing Locrian right, because the way he phrases in Locrian is just he's clearly hearing T as the resting tone. It's unreal.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a monster. Yeah.
Jennifer McDonald just came up with a CD for kids. She had somebody on it that I don't recognize, but she's got a Locrian tune. I don't know how to pronounce it. If I've always heard Locrian. I don't know. But I was just trying to find a way. Jennifer McDonald, little beats, counting shapes and sets. And I just listened to a little bit of each tune. And there's one in here that's totally Locrian. And I go, yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to mention it because some people might be interested in it. If you've got kids that are 3, 4 years old, it's probably a good CD for that. And of course, there's a lot of tonalities in there. And the Locrian one, I think, is 7/8 as well. If I'm recalling. At the fruits. So.
Yeah, Locrian's great. I mean, it might not even be worth learning how to pronounce it, Eric, since no one uses it.
True. I wanted to give it a mention because people might be interested in tonalities and meters for, a repertoire of kids songs, but are in different tonalities and meters.
You remember a while ago I was showing you this little, it wasn't a tune, but it was a little modulation of going from B Locrian to B flat Lydian is really interesting. So if you like... I don't know. I was trying to go from like Locrian to Lydian. I tried B Locrian over like a bunch of different Lydians, and B flat Lydian. It shares all the tones except one, and it just sounds so cool.
It sounds really nice actually. So yeah. So when you get familiar with these things, you can combine them. You could do a whole bunch of stuff. I've had this thought earlier, and I think we should venture into this topic at some point. That we're so heavily into the objective tonalities, but when you get into obviously dodecaphony, however you say it, and then 12 tones, basically what it means, but the magic hexachord of Bartók and these other tonalities. We've got to get into that, where you've got one that's Lydian sharp 2.
Yeah, so we're going to have an episode, I think probably the next episode, where I talk about my experiments with Lydian sharp 2, which is actually...
Yeah, it's coming up in the next couple, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like it more than Lydian now, and we'll get into why that is. It's a harmonic thing. There's a lot more harmonic options with Lydian sharp 2. But yeah, it was one of those ones where it felt like I was forcing it at first, and then all of a sudden I entered like this magical kingdom of Lydian sharp 2 where everything sounds so beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, there's got to be other tonalities that are as objective as some of the ones that are the typical diatonic tonalities that we...
Dorian sharp 4 is another one that is quite stable, and you can get it online and pin it down. Probably stronger than Lydian itself, which is scary to think, because you hear these like harmonic minor tonalities and you think they're kind of like, not as solid as the regular the classical diatonic tonalities, but some of these are very stable, and there's actually cultural songs that have these tonalities. I mean, this is not an example of that.
It's a major 2, the minor Dorian, obviously, and subtonic major, so...
if you compare this to stuff you already know, like it's like you're playing in D Dorian, but you have access to E7 chords. Which is really interesting.
Although I didn't do the 7, I just did the E.
Yeah, either way, in D Dorian, it's C or the G sharp that really stands out. It's got this very interesting... I think this is where you normally hear this kind of sound. It's got a very cool sound. It's one of those ones that, like, it sounds a lot different than Dorian. Even calling it, comparing it to Dorian is kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's got that Persian or Middle East kind of thing.
Yeah, and actually in the movie Aladdin, I'm not going to play it because we'll probably get sued by Disney here, but the song Arabian Nights uses that change. So it's very possible in that song, like, they're not actually thinking of this as a tonality. They're probably thinking D minor with an E7 chord, like with a 505. But I mean, it can hold up as a tonality too. It's every test you would throw at it. Every test you would throw at Lydian or Phrygian being a tonality, Lydian sharp 2 and Dorian sharp 4, they would also pass those tests. They have harmony and functions that go with them, and they stand out. And
yeah, cool. Well, we got beyond Lydian, but at one point we were tussling about why is Lydian squatted on so much.
Yeah.
And we thought we'd talk about it, and to me it's pretty simple, but there are different viewpoints out there.
Yeah, I mean, a great experiment you can do if this is something you're exploring yourself in your own audiation is try to play an F Lydian, take the functions 1 and 2 or F chord and a G chord in that keyality, and play around with that for a bit and really try to hear Fa as the resting tone, and then take a progression that goes F, G, A minor in A Aeolian and try to hear La as the resting tone, and it just helps hear the difference between those two.
Yep. Make differences. So learn Lydian up against something different, and you'll learn Lydian better, right? That's one of the golden rules of MLT. Put things together that are different.
Yep. Alrighty, till next time. Happy Lydianing.
Cool. Thanks, Beau.